Shabbat shalom, everybody. Just enjoying seeing everybody's faces. I want to start this evening from a counterintuitive place. I want to read the first lines of Psalm 120, which begin, Shir hamalot el Adonai betzartali karati v'ya'aneni. A song of ascents. In my distress, I called out to the Lord, and God answered me. Psalm 120 is the beginning psalm of the 15 Psalms of Ascent, the Shir Hamalot, of Psalms 120 through 134, which all start with either Shir Lamalot or Shir Hamalot. And they are all about starting from a low place, mimamakim, from the depths, or from the tzarot, from the sorrows, calling out to God in distress and being answered. These psalms have been on my mind lately as I feel we are in the depths. We are in the heart-wrenching, sorrowful places. And in particular this past week, in receiving the news that we did not want to receive, that we had been holding out hope for over 500 days, the news of the Bibas family that we now know, we don't know exactly where Shiri is, but that we do know that Ariel and Kfir, these two gingy boys, which is how they say it in Hebrew, these two boys with this beautiful red hair who were taken on October 7th would not be coming home from Gaza alive. It is shattering news. I've been thinking that we as a Jewish people need something to help carry us through this time. And so my mind has been on these 15 songs of ascent, these 15 Shir Hamalot. Could they be psalms that we use for this time to help us remember to call out to God in our times of distress, to be able to have the words, Min ha'amakim karaticha, God, from the deepest depths I call out to you, to know that it is okay to feel fearful and doubt in this time, to ask the question, Esa'enai el ha'arim, I lift my eyes up to the mountains, where will my help come from? The commentators ask, what are these 15 psalms? Why are they written like this, these Shir Hamalot? And they give various answers. Some say that these Shir Hamalot are for the literal steps between the two courtyards. So as you were ascending the literal steps in the courtyards of the temple, you would sing these 15 psalms going up. Some say they were meant to be sung as the Israelites were coming to the temple for their pilgrimage festivals, for Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. I said it out of order. Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot, that we hear about for the first time, actually, in this week's Parsha. And some say these are the psalms that are meant to be sung when going from exile to Israel, from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, a song of ascending to Jerusalem. But they are in some way meant to be a literal manifestation of a spiritual state. Psalms for ascending from low places, either emotionally, spiritually, or physically, to high places. And it turns out that this word, ma'alot, this word that means ascending or steps, is only used one time in the entire Torah, in the entire Chumash, the entire 5 books of Moses, and that is in the lead-in to this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha, Mishpatim, is sandwiched between two recountings of how to build an altar to God, how to build a physical monument of gratitude and awe. So as a reminder, the Israelites have just lived through the earth-shattering experience of Har Sinai, of Mount Sinai, of hearing the 10 Commandments. And then in this Parsha, they get the additional rules and laws that comprise Mishpatim. This is right before Moshe will go up to Har Sinai and receive the rest of the entire Torah from God. So it's sort of an odd Parsha. It's like suspended in between the 10 Commandments and the whole entire rest of the Torah. So it makes sense to me that they need a physical way to acknowledge that they have just undergone a major shift in their identity. And they are beginning the process of trying to establish themselves and who they are as people of Adonai, not slaves of Pharaoh. So I want to read from right before the Parsha begins, God's first instructions to them on making an altar, which leads us directly into Mishpatim. God instructs them, "Make for me an altar of earth and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your sacrifices of well-being, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you. And if you make for me an altar of stones, do not build it of hewn stones, for by wielding your tool upon them, you have profaned them. And do not ascend my altar by steps, ma'alot, that your nakedness, your erva, not be exposed upon it. So the two major commandments they receive immediately following Ma'amad Har Sinai are don't make an altar to God with cut stones, with hewn stones, and don't make the altar have steps. In some ways, these are incredibly mundane commandments, and in some ways, they are incredibly profound. So let's take them one by one. The first one, don't make an altar of hewn stones. The rabbis explain. An altar to God is ultimately something that is meant to be life-affirming. It would be counterintuitive to use a tool of iron, which is a tool that can be used to take life. The Hebrew is the same word for cherev, for sword. It would be counterintuitive to use an iron tool, a tool that could be used to take life. You cannot make a life-affirming monument with a tool that can also take life. This is how Ramban puts it. I say that the reason for the commandment is that a sword is made out of iron, and it is the destroyer of the world. For in lifting up any iron to make them, you have lifted up a murderous sword and increased victims, and thus you have profaned it. It is for this reason that there was no iron in the tabernacle, for even its pins, which would have been better if they had been made of iron, were instead made of copper. So I just want us to take that in for a moment. So great is our commandment to not increase victims and suffering in the world that we make it a point to not build our holiest spaces, our temple or our altars, with anything that could even come close to being the cause of harm to others. And the second commandment, or the second instruction, is to not make the altar have steps, to not ascend it by steps. And the practical reason given is because of the Israelites' dress at the time. You can imagine they wore sort of skirts or tunics, and so if you were ascending on the step, you would expose yourself, and that's not correct, and if you're trying to make something holy. Okay, that's the practical side. But Rashi says, actually what it means to say is don't make steps up to the altar. Instead, it should be a ramp, a sloping and even ramp, which I think can be interpreted spiritually. First, access to God and holiness should be accessible and equitable. Every human being has access to God, so every human being needs to have the opportunity to access our holy spaces without obstacles. And secondly, when you need to ascend from a low place to a high place, it's best not to think that it will happen in bold, overreaching steps. Instead, it'll be more like a ramp, slow and steady, more of a trudging climb that we all do together, as opposed to one triumphant bravado taken alone. Immediately following this, we have all the laws and rules of Mishpatim, how to treat those that you're sharing a society with, how to deal with the quarrels and the disagreements and the legal arguments, the injunction that we must do right by those most vulnerable in society, the widow and the orphan, and how to treat your neighbor. And after all this, after they get all of these laws and rules of Mishpatim, they do indeed make an altar. This altar is made with 12 pillars for each of the 12 tribes of Israel, and it represents the Israelites' agreement to enter into this covenant with God. They say immediately upon making it, they say, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do all that you have commanded to us. And I like that built into this covenant, built into this Na'aseh v'nishma moment, are the two underlying principles of the altar itself. One, we commit to turning towards life and peace, and we commit to making this new religion of Judaism accessible to everyone. And that brings me back to Psalm 120 and the final two verses of the psalm, which are, "Too long have I dwelt with those who hate peace. Ani shalom v'chi adaber hema lemilchama. I am peace. I am all peace, but when I speak, they are for war. Ani shalom, but I am for peace." I want to quote the plea from the Bibas family that we heard this week. They said, We ask that you do not yet eulogize our family. For those calling for revenge in our name, there are still 70 hostages that need to be returned. This is important. When you are in a low place, when you're in the depths of the depths, it can be so easy and so tempting to turn towards hatred, towards a desire to bring others low. We see this every day all around us. It is understandable, even natural maybe, to have this instinct. But I turn to the words of Psalm 120, the words of the Bibas family, a family that has known grief that no family should have to know, and to the values implicit in the very building of our holiest spaces from the Torah. And I repeat, Ani Shalom. We must be a peace-seeking people. We will not lift up our swords, even in service of building an altar. Even when all around us people are speaking hatred and war, we must remain steadfast in our commitment, in our covenant, to not be a people that is for destroying life, but a people instead out of the depths can call out to God and envision a future that is equitable and just, one where we take care of the neediest and most vulnerable among us, one where we behave rightly with one another, one where we open our arms to the stranger and to the immigrant. We will have to make the long, slow ascent out of the depths, and we will walk there not in large leaping steps, but on an even slope, trudging to the top, singing songs of ascent together. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.